We are up.
Video. If you don't want to be shown on video, this will be recorded. And so you can just turn your video off. I wanted to welcome everyone tonight. Happy Earth Day tomorrow. This is a really exciting program for me. I can't wait to learn more about what's going on in Maine and recycling. We have a special guest tonight, Lena Ives, and she is from Ecomaine. And she's going to be talking to us about there's no such thing as a way. Trash in our homes, communities, and in Maine. Here in Berwick, this past week, we've been doing a trash pickup, and we've, through the Envision Berwick movement, we've set it up as a kind of a contest and how much trash you can pick up on the side of the road. And it's been a really motivating and enlightening project to see how much trash that's been accumulating on the streets over the year. And we've been talking about what we can do as a community to educate and maybe change it from always picking up after people to educating people and making them think before they throw their trash away. And programs like this are going to help make that happen. So thank you to BCTV and our great partnership that we have to get the word out to our community and reach more people. I can't thank them enough for another great program stream. And I am going to turn it over to Lena Ives now. Welcome, Lena. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So just to introduce myself here, my name is Lena. I'm an environmental educator over at Ecomaine. And so my full-time gig is to share information about trash recycling and composting with the larger Maine community. And so I do things like this all the time. And just before we get started, a few housekeeping things. Questions and comments are free to be shared in the comments as we go along, and I'll get to them as I can, as I notice them come in. And you are more than welcome to pop off video and turn your mic off at whatever rate you'd like. Like we said, we'll be recording this, so you can find the recording after on the YouTube channel. And that's something that we can also share with you after as well. And then if you're interested in these types of topics, feel free to head over to Ecomaine social media, because we do events like this quite often. So you might be able to find some more opportunities to learn more. So right as we get started, I want to share with you who Ecomaine is. So how we kind of have, what our role is in Maine will kind of help know where this information is coming from. So we are a nonprofit organization that's based in Portland. And we're actually pretty unique in the waste management industry because for starters, we are a nonprofit, but we're also owned by 20 Maine municipalities. So we have 20 municipalities, most of which are in the greater Portland area, but we also have Bridgeton and Gray and Wyndham, so ones that are a little bit further out, that help us manage solid waste and recycling. So we provide these services to our communities, which are shown here, most of which are in southern Maine, and then we have 2 New Hampshire communities. In various facets, we provide some with just recycling, we provide some with just trash, we provide both to some, we collect compost from some. So we have a lot of different roles in these communities, but we have our foots in a lot of doors, I guess I would say. And what we do in the Berwick area is we provide recycling to the school system. So if you go over to the school system there, you'll see one of what we call our silver bullets, where we collect recycling from the school system there. So we do have a foot in your local door there too. And of course, at Elliott, Kittery, and Sanford are also some local towns that are involved with us here as well. So what Ecomaine does in terms of the larger Maine picture of things is that we provide recycling and waste services to about 70 communities, which I just showed you, which means that in a year where we are taking about a third of Maine's trash and recycling, and that equates out to be about 175,000 tons of trash and about 35,000 tons of recycling. So of course, the past year or so has been a bit of an anomaly, but that's actually stayed pretty consistent, just shifted a little bit in terms of commercial and residential tonnage. And all of our facilities here are located in Portland. Our recycling and waste energy facility, I'm actually sitting in our waste energy facility. Those are located right by Unum off of 95. So we're right on 22 or Outer Congress Street. And then our Asheville landfill is about 3 miles away on the Scarborough, South Portland, Westbrook, Portland line. So we're all pretty close, which is especially helpful in the greater Portland area because those trash trucks that are collecting trash from those communities don't have to go very far to get to their next destination. So tonight I wanted to talk a lot about trash and waste, which is something that we do quite often. And the way that I wanted to reference this for you is the different levels of how waste is really impactful, right? So we, of course, produce trash at a lot of different levels. We produce it in our households. We produce it when we go to school and work, and at community organizations like churches, gyms, restaurants, and things like that. And of course, our towns are managing their own trash and recycling. And then we're also managing on the state level, and we're managing on a national level. And of course, as you go from those levels, the tons of trash that are being accumulated from your household is very different from what we're accumulating on a statewide level. But when we think about this, we of course have a lot of influence over the amount of trash that we're accumulating and how that's managed at varying different levels as well. We have a lot of influence over how much trash we're creating in our household. And we even have a lot of influence in our workplaces, our schools, and our community organizations in different ways that we can get involved, which I'll talk about in a second here. And we also probably have quite a bit of sway in our towns too, if we're able to get involved on a recycling committee or with our public works department. But we have a little bit less sway and involvement in the statewide level of things, unless we work for the Department of Environmental Protection in Augusta, or if we work for the EPA, we would have a pretty big role. But otherwise, as individuals, we don't have a ton of influence over how waste is managed on those levels. But there are a lot of things that we can do at these varying levels, which I'm going to walk through, to help us reduce our waste and divert our waste. I'm going to talk a lot about diversion tonight. So first, I wanted to show you the waste hierarchy. This is something that was created by the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, for the entire US to help kind of arrange our values in terms of waste, right? So we have the 3 R's there: reduce, reuse, and recycle. And then we have compost and digestion, which I can mention in a second here, waste to energy, and raw trash landfills, right? And so as hierarchies work, we arrange these in a way that will convey that we would rather reduce things before we reuse them, and we would rather recycle things before we compost them, and so on. Of course, we can't always compost and recycle the same thing, and we can't always reduce something. We don't always have the option to reduce the amount of trash that we're creating, but we do have other options. And so this was kind of created to help us make decisions on a small individual scale or on a larger scale, right? So I use the waste hierarchy quite a bit in my personal life, and this could look like me at the grocery store deciding whether I'm going to buy pasta sauce in a plastic container that I could recycle, or one in a glass container that I could reuse. And then on the town level, it of course would look a little bit different, but towns and organizations like Ecomaine can use this to decide how we're going to manage our trash. What company are we going to sign a contract with to help us manage our trash or our recycling, and so on. And we also, of course, use it on a statewide level. The DEP uses the waste hierarchy to help the state as a whole make decisions about how we're managing our waste as well. So it's a tool that is used on a variety of different levels and can be really helpful, or I've found it really helpful in my personal life as well. So I wanted to talk about the household level of trash first, and recycling. And I want to preface this by saying that recycling and trash are very hyper-local. And so to get very specific on items as to where they should be going, whether it's your trash or recycling, Your local transfer station manager, public works department, and town manager are going to be your most accurate resources to provide that information. So if you have very specific questions, I can assist you in answering them, but I would direct you to them for the most accurate local information. But kind of to start off, of course, in our households, most of the time we have 2, maybe 3 options for our waste. We typically always have trash. We most of the times have recycling options, and then we sometimes also will have composting options. Like I said, these vary quite locally, so you might not be able to recycle everything that I can recycle here in Portland where you are, but you might. So it's worth checking in. But generally speaking, recycling applies to 5 items. So this would be paper, cardboard, plastic, glass, and metal. And the way that this varies locally is on the specific items that are recyclable. Some towns might not recycle plastics at all. Some might only do number 1s and 2s, or some might not recycle glass. It varies quite a bit. So it's worth checking in. But if it doesn't fall into those categories, it's probably going to fall into the trash category. So of course, our trash these days has a lot of non-recyclable plastic packaging. So unfortunately, not all plastics are made to be recycled. So things like 6-pack rings around a pack of soda, straws, chip bags, dog food bags, all of those would be considered non-recyclable plastics. And there are some others that are a little bit harder to describe and might not conjure an image. So I'm happy to go a little bit deeper into that, but it's not always as helpful as those specific items. But those non-recyclable plastics would be going in our trash. And then, of course, most of our households have some sort of biohazard related to them that would be going in the trash. This could be diapers, it could be pet waste, it could be some medication that didn't get used, and so on. But all of those items would also be going in the trash as well. And then we have 3 categories there that don't always have to go in the trash, but typically do end up in the trash in most of our households. So there would be some things that you might not be sure whether it's recyclable or not, or it might not be recyclable in your community, but it could be recycled somewhere else. But there are some recyclables that do end up in the trash. And of course, in the US, anywhere from 25 to 50% of our trash is typically food waste. So this would be your leftovers, your food scraps, the veggie peels before you made a stew. All of those things would end up in the trash if you didn't have a composting option available. Composting, especially in Maine, is becoming a lot more widespread and accessible, but it's still not always an option for folks. And of course, you could do it in your backyard. Not everyone likes to do that, so it's not always an option there either. And then, of course, we also have some useful items that might end up in our trash too. My favorite example of this are the Ziploc bags that shredded cheese comes in. A lot of folks just throw those out as a non-recyclable plastic, but I reuse them in my household quite a bit until the zipper stops working there, as a way to kind of divert those items from the trash and get as much use out of them as possible, so they're not just a single-use plastic that gets thrown right out. So as you can see here, we do have quite a bit of control about what we are putting in our trash and what we're diverting from trash and putting into recycling or composting or reusing in our own households, right? And so I encourage you to get familiar with your trash and your recycling and really find out what you are putting in there and if there are any other options for those items that might reduce your trash and could reduce your recycling too if you're able to get more use out of items. Because so communities are paying for trash and recycling by the ton, right? So if we're able to reduce our trash, the weight of our trash, say, for example, by diverting food waste from our trash and putting it in the compost, we're able to save our town money and also our taxpayer dollars from going to waste management services in that way. And if we're able to do this on a larger level by having multiple people do it, it can make a pretty big impact on our town budgets. So once you go up a level there from our households, we have quite a few options in terms of getting more involved in our workplaces and our schools. So of course, we probably have a pretty big influence at our workplaces and our schools just by being there, just by being a part of that community. And so we can make an impact in terms of diverting material that we're accruing at work and school from the trash. And there are a couple different ways to do this. A lot of businesses might not have recycling programs set up. For commercial places, it will require probably another budget item there to provide recycling services. Because of that, some businesses and organizations will just provide recycling for cardboard or paper or both, instead of including glass and plastic and metal in there too. But this could be something that you could get involved with at school and at work to help get more of that recycling out of the trash, or to get any recycling out of the trash. And of course, too, a lot of composting programs are being established at schools and at businesses to help get food waste out of the trash there. Of course, especially at schools, when we're eating lunch at school, that's creating a lot of food waste. And because typically everyone's given the same tray of food, not everyone will always want to eat what's given to them. And so there's a lot of food that will go right into the trash that's uneaten. And there's a few things that can be done there. We, of course, can compost that material, but there's also a really cool initiative that started and kind of paused because of the pandemic, but we're excited to see it start happening again, hopefully in the next school year. And these are called share tables. So these are a really cool tool for schools in particular. I'm sure you could do it at your workplace if you wanted to, but it might be a little less enthusiastically accepted there. But this is a program that's free to set up. You just have to allocate a table in the lunchroom for any food that you might not want to eat that hasn't been touched or eaten by someone else, but somebody else might be able to still eat it. So this could look like an apple that you don't like, a bag of carrots you don't want to eat, and you put it on that table, and anyone can take it that's hungry or might not have a snack for later, or might want to save it for after school. And so it's not going in the trash. It's being able to be diverted from compost, and you're also a help to feed some of your friends that might still be hungry. So those are some really cool initiatives that have been going on in our schools. And of course, like I mentioned, having composting and recycling services typically costs money. And so that can be an inhibiting factor, but there actually are quite a few grants set up in the state of Maine. Ecomaine provides one of them, but there are some others too that can help organizations and schools bridge that gap to establish these programs. And the Berwick school system is actually one of the ones that have benefited from this in the past. We helped establish the recycling program at the Berwick school system, which is why they have one of our Ecomaine recycling containers that you'll see in a little bit here. So they can be really helpful to help establish these programs. And I mean, the amount of tonnage of trash and recycling that are created on the school and business level is pretty huge. And so if we didn't have any recycling or composting there, we would be accruing a lot more trash. And so to be able to provide those services to more businesses and more schools is incredibly important down the line. And then when you bump up another level there, I've mentioned this earlier, but our towns also, of course, cover the cost for our trash and our recycling programs. In most cases, there are some that don't provide it, but in most cases, there is some sort of either a transfer station or a curbside program or both that is provided and covered by the town's budgets. And so the town level is making a lot of decisions about trash and recycling, particularly what company it's going to, what's happening to that trash. Is it going to a raw trash landfill? Is it going to a waste to energy facility? And where their recycling is going, how much recycling they're providing. Are they accepting number ones and twos, or are they accepting all plastics? So there are a lot of decisions that are made at the townwide level. And there are also some really cool ways to get involved at that level too, either through a recycling committee or getting more involved in your board of selectmen or board of directors as well. So you can be pretty impactful in your town if you get involved in that level. I've been on the recycling committee in my town for a little bit over a year now, and it's been really cool to see that level of action happening in my community. And then when you go a little bit wider there, we of course are talking on a statewide level. And so on the state level, because there are towns and communities making decisions about waste locally, the state is providing a lot of overarching legislature and investment in programs that can be provided to communities. So in Maine recently, this has involved a polystyrene or a styrofoam ban and a plastic bag ban. those are going to help to reduce a lot of trash in our communities, because a lot of our takeout containers are styrofoam, which can't be recycled, unfortunately. And of course, I'm sure, especially after this year, we all know how many plastic bags are being used every single day, even in our state. And so to reduce those amounts, we're reducing a ton of trash annually, which is a huge contributing factor in the long term, right? We would much rather see folks bring their reusable bags and to be using takeout containers that can be composted or recycled than to be using plastic-based materials. And then there's also some really cool investment happening as well. We have, the DEP, or the Department of Environmental Protection, is investing quite a lot in composting for the state. And we're also very lucky in the state of Maine to have the amount of composting organizations and operations as we do. We have a ton of different options. I believe down in your area, the most prominent would be Mr. Fox Composting, but there are quite a few sprinkled throughout the state that provide quite a few services, and we're investing in that to make it a more widespread and accessible option for everyone. And then another really big piece of legislation that's up this year is called Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR. And so just like we're coming from the bottom up and making sure that everyone knows what's recyclable and we're all doing our part in terms of diverting things from the trash, we also have to come from the top down at the same time to ensure that manufacturers and businesses are doing their part to reduce trash and waste as a whole as well. And so EPR is coming from top down to do that. And what it does is establishes an incentive, a financial incentive for manufacturers to provide less packaging and to provide more recyclable packaging and products to encourage that throughout the system, basically. And so this would look like a manufacturer having a bigger incentive to provide a package that's made out of all paper that could be recycled, or a package that is using less non-recyclable plastic like zip ties and styrofoam and things like that. And all of the money that's generated from that process of financial incentive from the manufacturers would go into a fund that would help reimburse municipalities to pay for trash and recycling services in their communities. So this would be a really cool tool that's actually really widespread in Canada and Europe to help incentivize manufacturers to be a bit more conscious about what they're making their products out of, increasing the amount of recycling that's going on, and also making their products out of recycled materials. And it also at the same time would be providing some financial assistance to municipalities, because providing trash and recycling services is becoming an increasing burden on municipalities throughout the state and also throughout the nation. And so to provide some balance there on how that money is being refunded to communities is really important. So on a statewide level, there's a lot going on in terms of waste right now in the state of Maine, but there also are other things going on throughout the country as well. And so to kind of help bring all of those together, all of those different initiatives, and provide essentially suggestions and different ways of improving access to waste and recycling and composting services, the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, essentially provides a lot of different resources. They don't do a whole heck of a lot in terms of legislation, though they do monitor landfills and they monitor waste energy facilities like ours. They have a pretty big role in that sense. But for this, in the other senses of waste management, they're really providing a lot of assistance in terms of suggestions on other ways to provide recycling, or to provide waste, or to provide composting, and being an organization that can kind of tie things together, right? So they're doing a lot in terms of investment and science as well. The EPA does a lot on landfill science, which is helping ensure that our landfills are as safe and as clean, I guess you would say, in terms of pollution and in terms of long-term storage as possible. So there's a lot of science that goes on in that sense as well. And they kind of consolidate all of this information to provide it back to states and to municipalities to help them make the right decisions for their communities. So on a nationwide level, there's not a whole heck of a lot that we can do to make changes, because a lot of these decisions, especially in waste, but in a lot of environmental ways as a whole, the most impactful things that we can do is get involved on a local level, because that's where a lot of the decisions are being made and are going to make the biggest impact on our own lives and in our communities. So, of course, even if we're superstars at diverting waste, we still create some trash. And so where does that go exactly? Like I mentioned, it's hyper local. And so where your trash goes in Berwick is going to be different than where the trash goes in Sanford. I live in New Gloucester, and the trash system is different than where it is in Gray, which is the next town over. And so there are a lot of differences there, and it's decided on by your individual municipality. But I'm going to take a look at different options in Maine and kind of look at where things go and the percentages across the state. So in Maine in 2019, which is the most recent data that we have that we've gone over, as a state, we created about 844,000 tons of trash. That equates out to be a little over 1.5 trillion pounds. So that's a lot of trash. It's by no means the most in the United States or anything, but it is a lot. And so there are a couple different places that this went, right? So about 48% of these tons were landfilled in their raw form, which means that they went from your trash bin at your transfer station or your trash bin on your curb directly to the landfill, and that's where they sat. And then about 50% of these tons went to a waste to energy plant, which is, I'm going to expand upon in a little bit here. Like Ecomaines, there are a few other located in the state as well, which is a different way of processing trash and has a few benefits, but about half of it went there. And so if you can do math, you'll notice that there's 2% missing there. Those 2% tons of trash, I guess you would say, were out of state waste that were processed here in Maine. So it doesn't really fall into those two categories and is left out. So in terms of recycling and composting in 2019, again, we composted about 68 or almost 69,000 tons, which is massive. That's amazing. And we recycled about 444,000 tons of trash, of recycling. So that's including glass, paper, plastic, cardboard, and metal. And it's also including scrap metal in there too. But the impact of that is huge, because when you collect those together, we diverted over 500,000 tons of waste from trash, and we're able to reallocate them to be composted, to feed animals, and do all of those different food waste items, and then to be made into new things. So that contribution is huge, in addition to the ways that recycling has kind of fostered a bit of our economy by investing money into our local economy in that sense, and also providing jobs as well. So these industries have really added quite a bit to Maine as a whole over the past few years. Like I said, these are 2019 data points, so doesn't really account for all that we saw last year. And hopefully this year we'll be able to get a little bit more information about what happened. But even so, it had a really huge impact to be able to divert this material from trash. But that being said, a lot of our trash, or a lot of our waste as a whole, is going to landfills. And so one of my coworkers made this graph here, which is an estimate about how quickly we are using up our landfill space in Maine. So we have about 40 landfills left open in the state of Maine, and there are different types of landfills. So we have state-owned and commercial landfills, which are pretty large. These would be places like Norridge Walk and Old Town, which is where a lot of your local trash is going, or to those organizations or those landfills. And then we also have municipal landfills, which is something that's kind of phasing out as they fill up. Back in the 70s and before then, most towns had their own municipal landfill. So the town of Gray had a landfill, the town of New Gloucester had a landfill, the town of Denmark had a landfill that would just be for those town residents. But over the years, of course, those landfills filled, and then those towns started looking to waste options that were outside of their town. So you might also have a landfill in your town that filled, and then your town at that point started contracting out to different organizations to put their waste elsewhere. So as those landfills have begun to fill, we've kind of been diverting our waste to other more bigger landfills. But as a whole, the 40 landfills that are left open in the state are approximated to fill about 2040, right? So that doesn't give us a lot of time to figure out what we're going to do at that time. But this is a statewide decision that is going to be made by a lot of different stakeholders and players in the process. And at that time, or over the next 20 years, we'll be kind of working on deciding about what we're going to do in that sense. Like I said, there are a lot of stakeholders involved. And of course, we'll be using that waste hierarchy to help us make these decisions. But even the small changes that we're able to make in our own homes has an impact on this this timeline of how quickly we fill our landfills. If we're able to divert compost and recycling from our trash, we're taking tons of material out of these landfills and ensuring that we have more space down the line. So rest assured that even if you're just saying no to a straw at a restaurant and at Dunkin' Donuts, or able to put even a little bit of your food waste into the compost, you're making a huge impact on this number overall. So, like I mentioned, we have quite a few raw trash landfills in the state of Maine, and a lot of our towns are sending our trash to these landfills. And before we had technology like composting and recycling and waste to energy, all of our trash was going to these raw trash landfills. And of course, I'm sure we're all familiar with some of the negative impacts of landfills as a whole. But some of the big ones there are their ability to harm local wildlife because of the smells that are created, as you can see in this picture, and as you might have seen prior. They attract quite a few vectors or wildlife to these areas in Maine. They can attract eagles and black bear, raccoons, seagulls, you name it. There's some wildlife that's probably been to a landfill. And so at the same time, they also have the potential to harm nearby water systems as well, if they're not managed properly. And especially when we're bringing raw trash to a landfill, there's more decomposition to that material that has yet to happen. And as that happens, it creates methane. And so there's quite a bit of pollution and gases that are created from raw trash landfills as well. And of course, as we know, when we're sending trash to a landfill raw, it sits in that same form for a very long time. And so if we're not doing anything to reduce that size on a large scale or a small scale in our own homes, it's occupying quite a bit of land. And of course, living in such a beautiful state as we do, we don't want to have our trash take up more open space than is really necessary. And so when we do start to make decisions about our landfill issue, we do want to take into account the open space that would be needed to create more landfills and use the space that we have left and the space that we create for landfills very wisely. And of course, landfills are very, very costly. It's costly to buy new acreage to create a new landfill, and it's also very costly to close an old landfill or a landfill that is filled, because there's a lot of science involved, a lot of material that's also involved to cover and cap those landfills. And then you also have to have staff available to monitor the landfill for a number of years afterwards to ensure that nothing changes, everything stays safe and contained. So there's a ton of money that goes into landfill management as well, which is something to think about too. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our waste to energy facility, which is how Ecomaine and a few other facilities in the state of Maine manage our trash. And like I mentioned earlier, that accounts for about half of the trash that is being managed and collected in the state of Maine is being processed this way. So I wanted to share that with you all. So this is kind of an overview of our facility here. I'm going to come back to it a little bit just to reference where you are in the process. It makes it a little bit easier for my brain to think about, so it might be a little bit easier for you too. But we start here on the tipping hall floor. This is where the trucks will dump what they collected either on the curb or at the transfer station. So you'll see a trash truck dumping their load here. We also off to the side have a compost storage bunker. So if trucks are collecting compost, they can drop that there. And we also have a place off to the side where we store things like car batteries, lithium ion batteries, freon containing items like air conditioners and refrigerators, because those items we don't want to process as we process the rest of our trash because they have some pretty gnarly chemicals in them. So right after we go through the tipping hall floor, which is here on the left, we have our trash storage bunker, which is actually about 7 stories deep or tall, however you want to think about it. Because we manage a lot of trash, we have to have a pretty big storage area for it before we're ready to process it. And so that's what this is. You'll see behind these garage bay doors is where we are dumping the trash on the tipping hall floor. And then we have a tractor that pushes that trash towards those garage bay doors. And so you saw it right at the beginning there that we have a crane or a claw that helps us move the trash around. We actually have 2 of those, one that's operated by a computer system most of the time, and the other that's operated by a human. And these claws are helping us to aerate the trash as well as move the trash. So like I mentioned, a lot of our trash contains food waste, which if you've ever left a bag of trash in your bin for too long, you'll notice that it starts to get a little bit drippy. It's very wet material. And so when we are picking trash up and dropping it, we're introducing air into the system and aerating that. So it keeps it a little bit drier, which is easier for us to manage. The more dry our trash is, the more energy we'll create from it down the line. So, like I said, we also use our claws to move the trash. And so each of these claws can hold 1 to 2 tons of trash. And we're picking this trash up and we're dropping it into a chute, which is fed into 2 different boilers that we have. So what we do with our trash is we combust it for about 4 hours at 2000 degrees, which creates a complete combustion, which does a couple things that I'll talk about in a second here. But something to notice here is how slowly this trash is moving. It actually looks like it's not moving at all. But that's because we just feed the trash in super slowly to our combustion boilers so that it stays in there for the full 4 hours and combusts completely. So you'll see the trash storage bunker here, and then the trash chute or that allow us to feed the boilers here. And then we end up in the boilers. So like I said, we have 2 boilers that are right next to each other, where we're combusting trash. And this is the inside of them. So like I mentioned, we combust at 2000 degrees approximately. That fluctuates a little bit when we're adding material that's particularly wet or cold. But generally speaking, we keep it at that 2000 degrees. And we operate these boilers 365 days a year, 24/7. So we always have folks that are operating our facilities here and keeping these boilers running and operating smoothly. And it's more efficient for us to burn consistently than it would be to let it die out over the weekend and start it back up on Monday as well. This is inside one of our boilers right here. So the fire would be going inside here typically. Once a year, we'll clean out the boilers and do almost like a flue cleaning like you would do on your wood stove to ensure that everything's clean and operating functionally. And so a few things to note here are these tubes right on the side here. These are steam tubes. So we feed water into these tubes, and as you can imagine, burning at 2000 degrees, the water turns to steam very quickly. And that steam is then forced through a generator or turbine that you'll see in a second. And that's how we're able to generate electricity from this process of combusting trash. And we also have these great systems here as well, which help us slow the trash through these boilers so that we're able to get a complete combustion and we're only getting ash out on the other side. So if we were to combust trash and get things that had not combusted fully out on the other side, they would still have decomposition happening at the landfill, but we would rather have them be completely chemically inert and no longer have any decomposition happening when we send that ash to our landfill, so that we aren't generating any methane at all. And so we know that that material is just essentially going to sit in the ground and nothing ever will happen to it again. Just sit. So like I mentioned, we're able to generate electricity through this process. So the electricity that I have in my office here is generated by trash. We also are able to power our 2 electric vehicles with this this energy. And on top of that, we are able to power anywhere from 10 to 15,000 homes annually with this power. And in September, we'll also actually have 2 trash trucks that are electric as well. And those will help us move the ash from our trash facility to our landfill. And those will also no longer be powered by diesel, they'll be powered by our trash electricity too, which is really exciting. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of oversight that has to happen in a facility like this. So there are quite a few cool things that go on in our control room, which is where we do a lot of this oversight. We have a lot of thermal imaging cameras, which help us pick really dry and warm places of trash in the trash storage bunker. He'll radio over to the folks that work in the crane cab and operate those cranes to say, over on your left, we have a dry pocket. Why don't you add that to boiler A, which is kind of low in terms of temperature right now, to get that temperature back up. Or he'll also help monitor to ensure that no fires break out on our tipping hall floor or in the trash storage bunker, which is something that could be really dangerous. But if that were to happen, we actually have 2 fire cannons, which operate a lot like a really big fire hose or a really big fire extinguisher. And we can operate them from our control room. And those can help us mitigate a fire if it were to break out on the tipping hall floor or in our trash storage bunker before the fire department were to come. Because we have so much material that's sitting there, we could have a really big fire really quickly. So we want to be able to help kind of mitigate that if it were to happen. And then, of course, as you might be able to notice here, we have a lot of engineering diagrams and monitors that go on in the background, a lot of graphs that help us monitor pollutants and chemical levels in the fire, which I'll talk about in a second here. And they also help us monitor very minute pieces in the puzzle of the waste to energy facility that ensure that the process is running as smoothly as possible. Of course, as you can imagine, operating boilers that are as large as we have here and that run as hot as we have are incredibly taxing to manage. And so to have these diagrams really helps us pinpoint any issues as they come up so that we can mitigate them as fast as possible. So, like I mentioned, I'm sure, as you know, that there are quite a few things that folks throw in the trash that could have potential pollutants in them. So we have quite a few different pollutant control systems in place. And the way that I like to think about this is, so we have very little control over what folks put in their trash, right? If you're throwing it into a trash bag and sending it to us in your curbside bin or at your transfer station, we have no way of processing it or opening the bags and seeing what's inside. So we kind of have to deal with what we get. And we also have a lot going against us in terms of the items that could be in the trash, right? We could have mercury thermometers, we could have pool chemicals, and even just the day-to-day plastics that end up in the trash can be pretty gnarly and intense to manage. But we do have a really cool opportunity here. Unlike raw trash landfills, we have the opportunity to watch the pollutants in the fire and monitor them on a minute-by-minute basis. Whereas in a raw trash landfill, we kind of put it in the ground and hope for the best, right? We have some controls and some monitors, but we don't have as specific and as trying to think of the word here, as minute of details about individual pollutants as we would with a waste to energy facility. Because we're processing trash in boilers, we're able to monitor pollutant levels on a minute-by-minute basis, and we're able to mitigate those as they pop up. So if we have someone that throws a thermometer with mercury in it into their trash, we notice it pop up as soon as it hits the boiler, and we're able to mitigate that as it happens. And we're not just hoping for the best down the line, as you would if you threw raw trash into a raw trash landfill and just left it to sit. So some of those processes that we use essentially follow the same chemical formula that we all learned, I believe, in high school with if you have an acid, you add a base to neutralize it. And so if we have something like mercury, we add activated carbon, which is a balancing factor, to neutralize it. We unfortunately can't reach in and grab the mercury and take it out. So instead, we'd rather isolate it in the ash than have it get into the air. So instead of allowing these to leave from our flue with our steam that's coming from the fire, we are isolating these different pollutants and different materials in our ash. So it's something tangible, right? If we had things leaving our flue, we wouldn't be able to see it or manage it. But if we have things like sulfuric acid or mercury in our ash, we're able to hold it if we wanted to. We probably don't, but we're able to identify this as a solid substance and say, this is pretty bad, but we're going to manage it in the proper way. And we're going to be able to see it if it causes any issues. We also have a pretty cool process of reducing things from leaving our flue, which is called an electrostatic precipitator. It sounds really fancy, but it's actually they look a lot like curtains and they're very large, but we force our steam through these curtains that are very, very fine and have electrostatic properties to them, which allow pollutants and what we call fly ash or particulate matter that would be in the steam to attract to these curtains and fall down. So if we have any ash that's leaving with our steam through our smokestack, it hits these curtains and falls down. And so it's not going to leave with the smoke that's coming out of our stack. It's going to get isolated with the ash in our conveyor belts coming out of the fire. So what this means is that when you're driving on 95 and you pass our facility, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to see much coming out of our stack because it's about 96% water vapor. And it looks like we're not operating at all, but that's actually just because most of what's coming out of there, 96% of that is just water vapor. And we have essentially no ash in our steam, so you can't visibly see it unless it's below 32 degrees when it actually becomes transparent like your breath on a cold day. So we have a lot of different processes that help us manage these pollutants really actively, so we're able to keep them from going out of our stack. And all the while, we also have the EPA and the Department of Environmental Protection monitoring our levels as well. So we have a lot of oversight there to help us manage that and ensure that we're not going over levels that are set by those organizations. So I wanted to show you the final product here. So we have a pile of raw trash, which is what we would be feeding into a raw trash landfill. But this is the pile of ash that we're able to see on the other side of our waste to energy facility of this same load of trash. So this ash, you'll notice, is about 90% reduced in volume. So if we get 10 trucks of trash that come into our facility here, we're going to leave with about 1 truck of ash, which is a pretty huge decrease in volume and size, which is very impactful when we think about landfilling our trash. And this looks, I'm going to compare it here so that you can see this green area, which is an area that was filled with raw trash in the 70s, accounts for about 4 communities and 10 years of trash. So this trash is raw. It was just put in the ground like a raw trash landfill. And then this gray area here is 30 years of trash for anywhere from 20 to 70 communities, which varied a lot over that 30-year period. But there's a pretty stark comparison here. So this is 4 communities and 10 years of trash in the green. And this is 30 years of trash for anywhere from 20 to 70 communities. And we'll also note that this is also only about half full, 2/3 of the way full. We still have a lot of space left in this area as well. So it's a really huge resource in terms of managing our space wisely at landfill, which is very impactful on a large scale when we're looking at the statewide level earlier, because we only have so much landfill space in the state before we have to open new landfills. So if we're able to reduce our trash in volume by 90% and have a very small amount of trash in comparison to what we got raw, it makes a really huge impact when we're able to do that for 70 communities. So to bring this back to your household level, what exactly can you do with this information to contribute to reducing the amount of trash we're putting into landfills? This is going to look a lot like getting familiar with your own trash. It might look, one tool I like to share is that you could put your trash and recycling bins a little bit further away from where they normally are, maybe in a pantry or a separate room. So you have to walk a little bit further to throw things out, to give yourself a moment to pause and say, can I reuse this? Can it be recycled or composted, or do I really have to throw it out? Just checking in there is a really cool tool. You could also, of course, do a household waste audit where you take a tarp and dump your trash out of the bag onto the tarp and divert or separate it out into compost, trash, reuse, and recycle, and see how much of your trash could actually be recycled or how much of it could be composted. And you could even weigh it before you divert it into those categories, and then weigh it again afterwards to see how much of a change you might be able to make. And of course, this might look like getting more familiar with what you can compost locally, what you can recycle locally, so that you know specifically those items, so that you know that you're doing your very best with what you have. And it could also look like getting involved with a local no buy group, which are some really cool community opportunities to gift items that you might not be able to use or might not want anymore to other community members. So that would be something to look into as well. Those are called no buy groups, and they're either located on Facebook or on an app. And it could be a really great way for you to get involved locally with a gift giving economy, which is a really cool circular part of our larger circular economy that we're all hoping for, which would eliminate trash entirely. But when we get a little bit more familiar and we're able to really boil our trash down to the things that are truly trash and can't be recycled or composted or reused, we typically end up with these categories. Again, just to touch on them, they would be non-recyclable plastics, which we do have quite a bit of. And then, of course, we have biohazards like diapers and medication and pet waste. And so at the end of the day, those things are 9 times out of 10 always going to be trash. But we do have opportunities to divert other things away from the trash as well to help reduce our own household trash and compost and recycle more. So to sum that all up, it's really all about pausing before you throw and getting more familiar with what you can reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and so on. So if you had any questions, generally speaking, we have some tips for recycling plastics, which are typically the most confusing items. This would be looking for that recycling symbol and the number 1 through 7. Typically, the things that are most recyclable are containers that are really rigid, like this cup here, and less so plastic bags and films like these guys here. And then you also would want to check out a recyclopedia. You might have one in your own town. Some towns have them. We also have one at Ecomaine where you can search an individual item like a basketball, a strawberry container, a milk jug, and it will tell you the best way to recycle, compost, or dispose of that item locally. So with that, I wanted to say thank you for joining me and open the floor for any questions if you have them. You can do that either with your voice on your mic, or you can do that by putting them in the comments or the chat, and I will read them. Can you touch briefly on how towns spearhead a ban on styrofoam and plastic bags? Yeah, that's a really wonderful question, and one that we've seen not everywhere, but there are quite a few towns, especially in southern Maine, that have done them. A lot of these come, of course, they'll come very frequently from recycling committees or from local environmental organization. Like we have in Freeport, I think it's called the Community Climate Group or something like that. Those types of organizations are usually ones that can petition and submit that petition to the Board of Selectmen or other boards in town to get an ordinance. Those would usually come in the form of an ordinance. And so it's kind of more of a grassroots movement when it comes on the townwide level. And then on the statewide level, it's coming as legislation that would be proposed by legislators.
Lena, I just have a comment. I remember back in the early 70s in Framingham, Massachusetts, they had the same setup where they would use the trash, burn it for energy. Do you know about the plant in Framingham?
I don't know specifically about Framingham, but I do know that there are quite a few in Massachusetts. I'm familiar most with the one that's Beverly or in that area. My parents live on the North Shore, so I'm very familiar with, I think they're all owned by the same organization.
I think they are.
Yeah, Wheelabrator, I believe.
It makes a lot of sense. Some of the problems that people have, particularly in Maine, even Massachusetts, are septic systems. And you really can't have garbage disposals with septic systems, although they do supposedly make some disposals that you can use with them. So a lot of people, unfortunately, are not able. I mean, if you can compost, but not always easy because then you attract animals.
Yeah, it can be really tough, which is why it's come down to making decisions about trash and composting and recycling on the townwide level, because there are nuances from town to town like those that have to be handled differently just in that local area. But the waste energy technology is really widespread in Europe and Canada as well, where they kind of faced the decision and the issue of having very little landfill space a lot sooner than we did, because especially in Europe, they have very little open space. So they've used it as a technology to kind of help them manage that trash in less space.
And the other comment I have is, everything is delivered these days. I mean, people don't go and shop anymore. In some cases, you get a tremendous amount of trash. I mean, I can't tell how many boxes we have, styrofoam from packaging. I mean, it's amazing how I think they overpackage. And I think that businesses should be held more accountable from beginning to end. That is, their product to what happens to it. But there seems to be a disconnect between the business community and recycling.
Absolutely.
So,
Okay.
Lena, I guess my question would be, why don't we have more of these plants? Why are we still using landfills?
That's a great question. And that also has a lot to do with local policy and local comment. With any waste management facility, raw trash landfills, waste to energy, it's really hard to combat local opposition and create them. A lot of folks don't want any sort of trash facility in their town. It's called Not in My Backyard, or NIMBY. Right. So those can be really big inhibiting factors. And there also are organizations and groups that struggle to see the benefits of waste energy in terms of, so a lot of them will oppose waste energy without really proposing a better option. Raw trash really isn't a better option in terms of space conservation and such, but they don't actively share other options. They just say, well, what about the pollution, which we do manage, and we do have national and state legislation that says we're allowed to have this amount of these pollutants, and they're parts per million. They're very specific. And so a lot of those organizations also share public comment without really proposing a better option, and just keep us stuck at where we are. That makes sense.
And there's how many plants in Maine?
There are 3.
3.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, Lynn. What is a transfer station? Because I know before we lived in York, in Lovell, Maine, which is right next to Freiburg,
Yeah.
they had what was called a transfer station. So
Yeah.
Is that a nice name for not dealing with the trash in your community and they transfer it someplace else?
It depends. There are some transfer stations. So transfer station is just, I don't know how they came up with that word, but it also is called the dump. Right. So in a lot of towns, I have a family house in Denmark, which is right near Lovell. They had a landfill there as part of their transfer station, which has since filled. And so in a lot of small towns like that, at one time it was its own landfill, and now it is as a place where they do collect trash and they bring it to another facility to be processed. Sure. So a transfer station will usually collect trash, recycling if it's offered in town, and then also scrap metal, grass or yard waste, They might also take appliances, electronics. It depends on the town, but they typically offer a lot more than curbside programs as well. So they can be a pretty big resource for folks if you have one in town. Do we have any other questions? If you come across any other questions at any point, you're more than welcome to call me over at Ecomaine or shoot me an email there. You can find all that information on our website. We are here to answer any recycling or trash questions you have at any time. We answer them all the time. So feel free to shoot us a call or an email if you come across something that you can't think of now.
Just one more question. Do you go to schools and present your talk to school children or, K to 12?
Yeah, that is about half of what we do as educators here. And so
Right.
year has been very tough for school education, but we've been doing a lot of Zoom stuff. But prior to this past year, we were in schools just about every day of the week. And we also had a lot of schools come to us and were able to see our facilities up front. And we also had like adults come to see our facilities in person too. It can be really cool to see how a facility like ours sorts out recyclables and also processes trash, and be able to see things like our tipping hall floor and our trash storage bunker and the claws in person, and kind of really get the sense of how much trash and how much recycling we're dealing with every day.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Of course.
This has been really, I just have to say, it's uplifting. I mean, usually I come away from these programs like, oh, I can't do enough, or we're doomed. What can we do to save the earth? But your program has been very uplifting and inspiring.
I'm
And
glad.
it's made me feel like, wow, there are people doing things that we really, that are making a difference, and that they tell us by just using our own household as a starting place, we are making a difference. And we don't hear that enough. And it's really wonderful. Thank you for looking at it from the glasses half full. So I appreciate that. It's been a great program. Very, very insightful. So thank you, Lena Ives, for
Yes.
coming
Thank
by.
you.
I look forward to maybe having another program when we can all meet in person. And I do have your email. So anyone that wants to communicate with Lena, please just reach out to me. I'm happy to share that, as she said she's happy to. And thank you, BCTV, for putting the word out too. We couldn't do without you also. So thank you so much from the Berwick Public Library and Berwick Community Television. And happy Earth Day tomorrow, everyone.
Thank you.